Now, this week, the review of stroke services in Kent and Medway announced its conclusions and its plan to centralise specialist stroke services in 3 hospitals at Dartford, Maidstone and Ashford. Now, the changes have been criticised, especially in Thanet and Medway. The Conservative MP for Rainham and Gillingham, Raymond Chishti, was particularly angry.
Well, I'm absolutely bitterly disappointed by this decision, and it defies all logic. You know, Medway has one of the highest deprivations in the country, along with Thanet, and both areas not to have a specialist stroke unit, you know, for me, just defies belief. Because at the end of the day, those considering making this decision had to look at health inequalities. There's a statutory duty to look at health, addressing health inequalities, and 20% in Medway and around 20% in Swell are affected by high health inequalities, and some of the highest in the country. People who are likely to have health inequalities and are more likely to suffer from stroke. And therefore, when you do not take that into account, then I'm absolutely appalled that, you know, those residents will not be getting this service. If the key criteria is having these centres where there is greater need, then under all the options that were put forward, Medway should have been part of that. And if that wasn't the case, my advice to the leader of Medway Council was to consider judicial reviewing it, to ensure that the procedure has been applied correctly and fairly.
Well, joining us now is the Chief Executive of the Kent and Medway Stroke Review, Patricia Davies, and its clinical lead, Dr David Hargroves. Thank you very much for joining us both. Patricia, first of all, it's not just Raymond Chishti. The Save Our NHS campaign group says this is an experiment on the people of Kent. And the Labour candidate in South Thanet, Rebecca Gordon-Nesbitt's also angry. Have you been surprised by the fury you appear to have unleashed this week?
Well, we fully understand people's emotions and their viewpoint, and in fact we conducted an extensive consultation process earlier this year. We reached out to more than 2 million of the population, and we had over 5,000 responses, which is quite unprecedented for a consultation of this reach. So we were really pleased with the amount of engagement from members of the public, and indeed for the whole 4 years that we've been doing this, David, we've engaged with stroke survivors in particular who've helped with the clinicians to design these services. And I think it's important to note that over 85% of the population that responded to the consultation absolutely got it. In fact, they very much supported the hyperacute stroke model and centralising stroke services. And in fact, many of our patients are saying, please get on with it now.
But the people of Medway and the people of Thanet didn't get it.
Well, a lot of those responses did come from those areas, and so it's not an overwhelming generalist view held by people of Thanet or Medway that, you know, they're against this option. The majority of patients actually support this option.
Okay, if I bring in David at this point, those health inequalities that Raymond Chishti is particularly exercised about, and it's not just him. The leader of the council in Medway said that their lives are potentially going to be put at risk by this. More people in Medway are likely to have a stroke, you could argue, than in other parts of Kent. So did you really look at that when you decided not to give them a hyper-acute unit?
So I think what's really important is to put this in perspective. So 80% of strokes are preventable, and so it's about lifestyle choices, it's about treating hypertension, diabetes, and trying to prevent patients having a stroke. There's no doubt that social deprivation does increase the risk of some of those conditions that can lead to stroke. But unfortunately, there's still this inequality with regards to life expectancy. The majority of strokes happen in older people, so in fact it isn't the case that there are more stroke individuals suffering in areas of social deprivation because their life expectancy is a lot less. What we need to do is work together so that we can prevent strokes for all patients. I mean, I think what's happened in the last week is great news for the population of Kent and Medway. This has always been about patients. It's been about delivering the best possible care throughout the pathway and reducing death and disability. If we take other services that have reorganised, we've seen significant reduction in mortality and chance of death. So this is really a positive step.
Just the other point, sorry, if I may, around the inequalities piece. We, throughout the entire process, looked as part of the assessment around inequalities. We did a full equalities impact assessment, and the results of that demonstrated that most definitively all patients of Kent and Medway, including Thanet and Medway residents, would benefit from this service.
Okay, because that's funny enough what I was going to bring up next, because that FAST campaign we've all seen on the television, on the back of buses, that tells us it's imperative that you get treatment as quickly as you possibly can within the first hour. If you live more than an hour away from your nearest stroke unit, you can understand why people are worried by what you're telling them. David?
So, I mean, the FAST campaign was one of the most successful public health messaging campaigns we've had, starting in 2009 through to 2012. And the whole point of that campaign was to raise awareness amongst the general public not to sit at home when they're having neurological deficits. The biggest problem is patients not recognising that they're having a stroke and delaying contacting health services. The FAST campaign was about ensuring that everyone picked up the phone.
So what you're saying is once you're in an ambulance and you're on the journey, that process of care has begun.
Yes. What's as important as how long it takes you to get to a health service, it's the quality of the health service you're going to. There isn't value in going to a stroke service that doesn't have the technology and the staff, predominantly the staff, that can care for you 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. So it is really important to get to the right centre. Now, we've recently seen some reorganisation in Northumbria, and they've demonstrated that you can travel further, but the time from the moment you call to the time you get your treatment is exactly the same, because the teams are working in a specialist centre and they're working quicker. So they've reduced the chances of...
Patricia, taking all that into account, do you understand, though, why there is such strong feeling and why people like Raymond Chishti are so angry?
Well, I mean, I can understand that sense of feeling, but the evidence, the clinical evidence, is overwhelming that centres of excellence actually saves lives and reduces disability. And quite frankly, as a clinician myself and a local Kent and Medway patient, I find it indefensible that we don't have these kind of services locally.
And if there were to be a judicial review, which again Mr Chishti mentioned, are you confident that the procedures you've been through are robust enough to hold up under that scrutiny?
Absolutely. I think we've engaged with the public all along. We've engaged with Medway Council. In fact, Medway councillors have been an integral part of that consultation process. And in fact, on the 5th of July, in the joint HOSC Health Overview and Scrutiny Committee, Medway councillors... it is. Medway councillors actually commended the process that they've been involved with.
OK, thank you very much. Now, Ian, you live in Pembury, which is one of the places that's going to lose its stroke unit. Obviously, we all hope here that nothing happens to you, but if you had to travel further afield to Maidstone, would that concern you?
Well, as a type 2 diabetic, I suppose I'm actually in the category. But I think, look, local MPs like Raymond Chishti are always going to say that because they think their constituents will be angry about the losing a service. But in the end, am I going to believe a politician or am I going to believe the experts? Now, from what I've read about this, and I'm no expert on it, from what I've read about it, I think it sounds entirely the right thing to do. People never like change. Who is going to say, yes, I would love to lose that service from my local hospital that is literally a mile and a half down the road from me? I don't want to lose that, but I do understand.
Let's bring in a politician, because, Peter, this very change happened in Hastings and Eastbourne several years ago. Hastings, the Conquest Hospital, in St Leonard's, lost its stroke unit. Patients now have to go to Eastbourne, but actually the NHS would argue the outcomes have been good.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't looked at the figures or statistics, but anecdotally, I think people are still concerned about it. I mean, the former council leader of Hastings, Jeremy Birch, died of a stroke, and that was partly because they were unable to stabilise him in the ambulance on the way to Eastbourne.
OK, well, thank you very much, and thank you to Patricia and Dr David Hargroves for joining us in the studio. That's all we've got time for from the South East this week.